We're going to focus on a few games. We'll start with this game between Ding Liren and Nepomniachtchi. And in going over games, okay, both games that are your own games, with grandmasters, uh, you know, any game, right? There's a couple of things that I like to really try to analyze and learn from, right? One is okay, the opening within reason. And by the way, right, until you're 1600, I would not be building out like an opening repertoire, right? You should have one very simple thing, like as white, either e4 or d4, one thing against d4, and one thing against d4. Would you say you have that so far? Okay, so and not many moves deep, right? If you look here, right, I remember last night I was looking at this game, and it was like what move 15 or so. There was a novelty, you know, right? And for me, I was like, wow, like, and then a lot of students will try to do like the same thing, and then they'll like end up actually getting like out of theory even much earlier, and if they don't, then they'll make a mistake like shortly after. So yeah, one thing to consider is like the opening, right? And then really making sure that every single move has some sort of purpose, right? And you'll notice that especially at the top levels, right, players will not like settle for like an okay move, right? So one thing that I would say a lot of students under 2000 will do all the time is they'll be okay with like a good move, right? I'll say, oh, like, why'd you do that? Because, it was decent. It wasn't a blunder. It wasn't this. It wasn't that. Um, but like, no, you're going to see that. Like, okay, it's like all the time. Maybe, I mean, of course, not all the time the best move, right? Just by nature, right away, you could look that black won this game, right? White starts with an advantage in chess. So clearly, on the whole, the red made, at least slightly worse moves than the Pomniachski, right? Which is another important point, too, right? Better players beat weaker players in general, not because weaker players will make better mistakes, right? And by the way, I mean, on the whole, right, Duran is 40 points higher than the Pomniachski, right? At that level, that's a lot, right? The 40 points between an 800, let's say, and an 840 is nothing. The difference of my rating, 2200 and a 2240, nothing. Difference of 2760 and 2800 is actually pretty massive. So, okay, so we have an English opening, right? And here you can see an interesting sort of dynamic. And Napami actually plays this queen takes d5 move, knight c2. And you can see here that, yeah, like it's been played a couple times before. White has basically a lead in development, but black has, okay, a strong center. So you could see that, yeah, the Palmiazzi is moving his queen around the board, right? I'm sure you've, learned before that developing your queen too early could be like a little bit risky. But at the same time here, well, it's not, like so easy because also, yeah, like knight a6. Okay, interesting. So we're just gonna get through the opening, right? Which is not like all that exciting, right? And notice, right, both sides, right? Yeah, it's a advanced game, but really they're developing their pieces, right, and like controlling the center. Yeah. So bishop b2, queen h5, right? Black is already starting to attack a little bit. White defends, right? And how would you evaluate this position, right? Like, who do you think has a better position? So you think white is a little better? Okay. So to evaluate a position, okay, there are actually 7 steps that you want to use um, to, yeah, there's 7 steps you want to use to, okay, evaluate a position. So I'm going to actually, yeah, start whiteboard here. or just text here. Okay, and yeah, right. You have 7 steps to evaluate a position. Now, what do you think those might be? What are 7 things you should look at when trying to figure out who has a better position and why? What's like the first thing you would consider? That's almost like a little bit even too obvious. If I was playing, I don't know, your coach, okay, in a game, and you walked over to the board, right? And you were like, "What's going on?" What's like the first thing you would probably look at? Maybe without even thinking. Yeah, right. Well, material, right? Not just the number of the pieces, but right, material, right? Am I up a pawn? Right. That would be something important to consider. What about the pawns? Right, pawn structure, right? And then there's something about like freedom of the pieces, right? So you got space, right? And then lastly, you have attack/initiative. Okay, so these are actually 7 things, and I'll send you a blog post later on there. I kind of write about that in a lot more detail. But right, yeah, these are your basically 7 steps to evaluate a position. Right now, I was just actually so I have my own podcast. You probably heard of Dan Heisman, a great Philly coach, who's been on it a few weeks ago. But I was listening to Ben Johnson's podcast the other day, which Dan Heisman was also on previously, and who's a Philly coach as well. You probably heard of him. But anyway, one thing that he said the other day when he was actually talking to Eugene Perlstein was that he actually wrote a book recently just about evaluating chess positions. Okay, it's something that actually hasn't been covered in that many books. Right, it's the type of thing that you want to do every 3 to 4 moves, right? And especially during transitions, okay, from the opening to the middle game and the middle game to the end game, right? And the reason it's so important to evaluate the position is you want to have that affect your plan. So, like in this position, right? Overall, okay, well, let's see, right? You could look at one by one, right? Who has a safer king right now, right? Yeah, right, because White's castle is not exactly perfect, right? Black also even has not necessarily right away, but like some potential sacrifices here, right? So yeah, like for sure, right? Not even probably, it's definitely right. And that one thing, by the way, is also something that I can't stress enough. Actually, is how important it is to be like very, very precise and confident in chess. Right. The other day, this happens to me all the time. Right. I'll ask a student, "Hey, like, what should Black do here?" And he's like, "Oh, well, there's Bishop B6, there's Bishop F5, there's right." And I'm like, "No, you're just listing out the moves, right? I could have asked the beginner, and he could have told me that question, right? But no, you got to be like, because almost always, right, when you turn on an engine, one move is going to be the best, right? Queen C2, 0.7, Rook B1, 0.4, right? So yeah, both are options, but of course, Queen C2 like makes more sense. Okay, so right, so development, right? Who has better development right now? 2 things, right? One, well, actually, really one thing, right? Yeah, like White does have, I would say, more development here. But right, one thing that you did that you kind of want to try to avoid is doing kind of 2 steps at once, right? Because it'll actually get you like confusing, right? Because you started talking about space, right? Which, by the way, I would disagree with. I think if we jump ahead to space, I think both sides have pretty equal space, right? So space, you're mainly looking at bishops, right, and their long range, right? None of these bishops on the board really are limited. In fact, if anything, I would say maybe Black has a small space advantage, right? Because this bishop is, at least temporarily hemmed in on the pawn, right? Maybe. So, okay, like center, right? Who has an advantage in the center? Well, Black has a pawn in the center, right? I think black has more access to the center right now, right? So, right, for now, anyway, right? And another thing too that you want to try to avoid is um, evaluating the position like in the future, right? Sometimes someone will be like one move away from castling, right? And they'll say, "Oh, my king is safe," but the truth is, right, that's one move later, right? By the time you might fix your castling, then you might be behind in development. So try to, yeah, like evaluate, okay, like right now. And attack slash initiative, no one's really attacking yet, right? No one really has any threats just yet, right? Like, for instance, maybe you'd be concerned about a sacrifice like this, but of course, since you could trade, it's just not exactly sound yet. Right? Yeah, his king is exposed, but okay, not really enough. So if we go back to this position, right? Yeah, I would say that white overall had a fairly successful opening, right? I do think he is better in the position. I don't think he's like substantially better, but okay, like overall, a little bit better. So, given what we said, basically, that white has like maybe a little bit of an advantage, but black has maybe a slightly better king, right? What would you suggest as a plan for both white and black? So that yes, he's definitely going to try to defend, but defending is not a plan, right? Which, by the way, is another like very, very, very common thing that like students will do, right, is they'll be what's called like basically a reactionary. Okay, so a couple of years ago, I had a student at we were in programs in 80 schools. This one high school kid that I was working with, said something interesting that I'll never forget. Basically, um, I was teaching him, and he basically said, uh, "Well, so I said, every single time your opponent makes a move, you really want to ask yourself, why did he go there? Right? And then figure out a way to respond." So he said something which was smart, but at the same time, not so smart. And he basically said that if consistently, uh, just respond to whatever it is that your opponent is doing, right, you're going to become a reactionary. Right. So it was kind of smart because, yeah, you can't in chess just, always consistently respond to, whatever it is that your opponent is doing. But at the same time, of course, you need to look all the time. Right. A lot of simple blunders will happen in chess because you just don't know, what your opponent is doing. Right. You get a little too excited about your opponent's plan. Right. So White's plan, right? What do you think White's plan will be? Right, yes, he'll have to defend, but how is he going to like improve his position? Right, because another thing to keep in mind, right, especially at this level, even my level, but especially this level, right, Nepo or uh, Laurent, right, they're not going to win because of blunders, right? They're not hanging any pieces. Now, eventually, they might under like positional pressure. That's different, right? But they're not moving pieces to squares where there could be a pin, a fork, right? Rarely, by the way. It does happen. It does happen. Like there was a non-Kramnik World Championship back in 2014, I believe. And one of the games, Kramnik hung checkmate in two moves. And people are like, whoa, right? Like former World Championship falling for checkmate in two moves. And literally like the type of thing that like, you know, uh, I would show students and they would solve in 2 seconds. But okay, it was also during the pressure of the tournament. They were, playing for 5 hours or whatever. And okay, like, it was a simple checkmate in two. But okay, not very common. So yeah, what do you think White's playing? Typically, right? You're not going to be able to create a plan in an area where you're worse than your opponent, right? Just like, I kind of tell people like, and we do teach a lot of corporate classes, right? One thing that I'll relate to in business all the time, right? I'm not just gonna like say like, I'm gonna start a basketball company tomorrow and do like successful in it, right? Like I'm a chess company. Now I do have actually a very very close friend, one of my best friends, who runs a basketball company all over the country. I refer him all the time, right? So it's kind of like here, right? It's similar, somewhat thing, right? Look, black has an advantage in king safety, right? It wouldn't really make sense for white to start saying, "Oh, you know what? I'm going to go for a king side attack," right? But which pawn of black is a little bit weak? Exactly, right? So one thing that you want to consider in chess sometimes, right, is look, this pawn on e4, right? It's not isolated, right? Because there's the pawn here on the file next to it, but sort of temporarily, it kind of is, right? With that bishop being on f6. So, like, maybe you could try to, okay, like, take advantage of it. So, yeah, that's why, okay, queen c2 makes positional sense. Right? And the computer, yeah, gives plus 0.4, okay? So, slightly better. So, okay. So, knight takes e3, d takes e3. Now these pawns, of course, doubled. Knight a4, takes. So white had a small advantage in pawn structure. So, okay, it made sense for him to try to go for a couple trades. Okay, so here we go. Knight c4, right? So one of the reasons that I was like kind of interested in this game today and yesterday was I might have misevaluated the position here, right? And like computer, okay, actually says 0.0, right? And one thing, by the way, that you really want to make sure you avoid, okay, when you're looking at games, is to like strictly rely on the computer, okay? So one thing that I think a lot of players will do, right, is they'll see this position and say, okay, it's equal, right, and not really look at like the nuances of the position, right? So not like every equal position like is the same. Like in this position, who would you rather be here, right? If I said you could be white or black, right? It's black to move. Who would you prefer to be? So I wouldn't say black is 100% attacking white's king yet. I would say he has a safer king. I wouldn't say he's actually attacking yet, right? He right now he doesn't really have any pieces like exactly near the king, right? So one thing like is easy to do is you get a little too excited. Okay, and by the way, when I worked with Grandmaster Landon Dudassin, okay, at his peak seventh in the world, one of the things that he really worked on with me in the beginning was how you really want to make sure you're not getting too excited about your valuation, right? Because I would, in positions like this, see, yeah, he has like a weaker king. Maybe like I'm attacking. But the truth is, yeah, you're not exactly like attacking just yet. No, and that, no, look, it's a valid suggestion, right? I mean, for one, look, I mean, I try one thing too that you want to like avoid, okay, is looking at the result too much, like when you're analyzing the game, right? Like I'm sure you've noticed that like Nepo won the game. Okay, so maybe it's easier to play for Nepo because he won the game, right? Which is why, by the way, right, whenever I look, sometimes you can't help it in these online lessons because the result is there already. But like when I'm looking at a lesson in one of our corporate classes or one of our school programs where I'm just using a book, uh, they'll ask me all like, who won this game? Who won this game? Who won this game? I said I won't tell you until the end. right? That way you're not like, twisted in your evaluation. Not to mention, right, even at the top level, right? I was looking at this game yesterday but from the candidates. We can actually maybe take a look at it after if we have a chance. It was from Report and Nakamura. Uh, Nakamura actually had like easy winning chances that he like just missed. Basically. Um, or actually, no, it was Nakamura and Nepomniachtchi. That's right. Yeah, where like Nepomniachtchi was like, just almost losing, and okay, he basically escaped with the draw. Um, but yeah, like okay, so honestly, it's complicated, right? Because like this pawn is also a little bit weak. White's planning things like knight c4 and knight d6. Putting pressure there. So okay, it's a little bit complicated. So let's see what happens, right? As you can see, White's playing on the queen side, and Nepomniachtchi is, going for an attack. Okay, so h6, trying to maybe play g5, okay, and opening up more lines. So as you can see, right, both sides are like really going into it. It's a pretty, unclear position, right? But wow, and now he, okay, decides to sacrifice a rook. Right? Obviously, very interesting, but he wins the rook back. And yeah, in this position, it was forced checkmate. So yeah, bishop h3, he resigned actually, but yeah, after king takes h3, right, this would be, yeah, a forced checkmate. Yeah, he could like, throw in a move here. Rook takes. Right, he could throw in some more checks to like delay it, but okay, that would be me. Okay, so oh yeah, queen d4 check. F6 check, queen takes, and there you go. So okay, so any thoughts or questions about any of that? Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, if we go to this position, so yeah, like so one thing that is, and by the way, right, I mean both are completely winning. Right? I mean, computer will sometimes say like ridiculous evaluation, but yeah, after h takes g2, it says you're up plus 60, and rook takes e4, you're like up plus 12. So both are easily winning, right? And I would say, by the way, that like in practice, right, if you're not a super grandmaster, like yeah, rook takes c4 would be like the better decision, honestly, right? Because you're not necessarily calculating everything like 100%. Um, 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 so right, but right, so you don't want to go for complications when you have a winning position. I mean, okay, like he forced the rook because it's actually forced checkmate, right? Like so that's like where. And let's look at this game that I was looking at yesterday as well. So yeah, this was between Nepomniachtchi and Varauja. So Varauja is kind of young up and coming prodigy, but more than up and coming already. I mean, he's in the candidates. He's 2760 FIDE. Uh, so yeah, more than up and coming. A lot of people thought he might have even had a shot to qualify. He is actually in like last place of the tournament, but okay. I mean, even with his 2 out of 7 score currently, that's like a 2750 like performance. So okay, so let's go over one more game. C5, knight f3, d6. Okay, so this is yeah, silly knight. Okay, very sharp position. Right, so e5 is a little bit risky because it creates this like backward d pawn. Okay, so now see that cast on opposite wings. What does that mean about the position? Right, if the kings are castled on opposite wings, right, that basically means that pawns could easily happen. Okay, so like white could start storming pawns in front of black's king, and black can start storming some pawns in front of white's king. Okay, like normally in chess, right? Like most often, right? When you have your own front pawns in front of your king, right? You can't exactly just like storm them in front of your king, right? To attack your opponent. All right. Well, great working with you. Hope to see you again at some point, and have a good rest of your weekend.